What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and recently Insomniac has definitively confirmed something about their Spider-Man universe that has drove the fan base into a rabid frenzy. That revelation being that Miles Morales will be the main Spider-Man in their universe, and fans are, well, they're mad fellas. They are definitely not having it, to put it lightly. I should probably also state that this video will be full of spoilers for Spider-Man 2's story. So if you haven't beaten it or something, I guess don't watch this, because I'll be talking about the ending of the game and all the nonsense that's being teased. Cool? Alright, let's begin. So this all started because of a Gizmodo interview that came out in late October. The interview was framed around asking the creators at Insomniac about Spider-Man 2 from Venom and other future ideas they have for the franchise, like Cindy Moon, or as she's better known as Silk. One part of the interview went nuclear, where the interviewers asked, "You said earlier you basically knew right away that you wanted playable Venom. Does that also apply to ending this game with Miles as the main Spider-Man from now on?" To which the creators being interviewed said, and I quote, "It always felt very natural, and I think we all collectively thought it would happen. To me, it shows a great deal of evolution from Miles. At the beginning of the game, we see him struggling to figure out what he wants to do with his life. By the end, we had Miles carrying the burden of saving the city and also carrying Pete when Pete wasn't strong enough to carry himself at various points. That's what's been so cool about writing a story about two Spider-Men. They're both strong, and one of them can be strong when the other is not. By the end, Miles is more confident and he's like, yeah, I got this. How much worse can things get after what we've just went through?" To echo what Brittany said, the idea of a two Spider-Man story was always really essential to this game. I think pretty early on we knew that we wanted to have that moment of handing the reins over. As we developed it, as we started to lay down more track leading up to that moment, it just felt more and more right. I think it was John who wrote that scene in Aunt May's garage, and it's one of my favorite scenes. The way that Miles intuitively knows exactly what Pete is thinking and stops him from stumbling through trying to hand over the mask. Miles going, "You know I got this, bro," is such a great moment between the two of them. And it felt like such a natural conclusion. I'm not sure when specifically we decided to do that, but it always felt like the only way the game could end, end quote. Oh geez. As you can see, according to Insomniac's creatives, the decision was always going to be to sideline and eventually replace Peter Parker with Miles Morales when it came to the mantle of Spider-Man. And before I get spicy, I do want to say that I genuinely do like Miles Morales. I don't think he's a bad character, I think he's his own person, and I do actually enjoy playing as him in the games too. I like that he has a unique power set, and I actually do think he's a good character. However, this is the wrong move in almost every way, especially this early in Insomniac's Spider-Man universe, and let me tell you why. For those of you who've beaten Spider-Man 2, you know that Venom is the big bad and essentially tries to turn New York into an alien dystopia. The game frames Harry Osborn as Venom, which I personally didn't like myself, and I wish that Kraven the Hunter was the one to become Venom instead. Personally, I think a Kraven Venom would be far more deadly and would make Venom's symbiotic army much more terrifying, since it would be Kraven's own hunters that willingly became his thrall. And that would have made much more sense, since Kraven also has cancer and the suit would have cured him. And Kraven would have made the entirety of New York into his hunting ground, as he deems himself the apex predator. This would have given both Miles and Peter the story reasons to want to end Kraven. But instead, Venom is Harry, and immediately this cuts off Miles from the personal connection side of things, with only Peter having any emotional connection to Harry, since Miles, if I remember correctly, only meets Harry once at Coney Island, and that's it basically. Even so, it turns out in the game that Miles ends up having the final actual in-game battle against Venom anyway, which makes zero sense, since again, Miles has no connection to Harry. So to make the final fight between Venom be against Miles, it makes zero sense. And in this new added context, it shows that Insomniac did this on purpose to show that Peter was too weak to beat Venom. So their new Spider-Man had to be the one to finish the fight, which is annoying to say the least. This eventually leads to Peter taking a break as Spider-Man, which personally I don't mind. I think a little mini vacation post Spider-Man 2 makes sense for Peter to do, but for him to relegate himself to second place in an identity he founded going forward, not to mention in the prime of his life, it makes zero sense. It makes even less sense when Insomniac very clearly sets up Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin to be the duo main big bads of their eventual third game, since neither of these villains have any emotional connections to Miles in any way. Which again makes the idea of Miles being your main Spider-Man in your third game also make absolutely no sense even further. If you see the reoccurring problem here, it's that Miles, whether you like to admit it or not, has basically no personal connection to any of Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Besides the fact that villains like Kraven, Venom, or Green Goblin have no connection to Miles, besides the Prowler, pretty much there's nothing Miles brings to the table here that is unique story or thematically. This whole making Miles Spider-Man would be like if in Batman Arkham Knight suddenly Robin was Batman. The personal connection between Dick Grayson as Batman against foes like Scarecrow or whoever else would have no personal or thematic connection because the person in the cowl has no thematic reason for being there other than to simply be there. This is why making Miles Morales your main Spider-Man in your third game makes zero sense. Harry is the son of Norman Osborn, who thinks of Peter as his other son, not Miles. He doesn't even know who Miles is and likely probably has no idea Miles Morales as a human being even exists. And even when it comes to Spider-Man 2, Miles' main villain, I guess, is Mr. Negative, which is another villain that is not uniquely Miles' villain either. He's a Spider-Man villain, not a Miles villain. Hell, even when Miles got his own spin-off game, his main villain was the Tinkerer, which again, they had to race and gender swap just to make the Spider-Man villain have any connection to Miles. What I'm trying to say here is that Insomniac is forcing something that very clearly doesn't fit into what they're doing, and it's only being done for diversity and ESG reasons. It's sort of like how Overwatch always adds new heroes that are all checking various lists, like their new hero Maga, who's a Samoan man, or the next hero Venture, who's officially the first Overwatch hero to be non-binary, as if that matters when it comes to a video game when you're fighting other people. These things are simply chosen because of diversity and pandering reasons. I mean, Blizzard has a literal diversity algorithm tool that calculates if the characters being made can hit high scores when it comes to pandering. That's not me making that up, by the way, that's real. And we're seeing this very weird and deliberate push by game studios as well as Hollywood to cram as much diversity and unironically put a chick in it and make her gay and lame at almost every opportunity. Anyway, Miles Morales is like Venture, Maga, and many others. They are simply being forced even when they don't make sense thematically, story-wise, and so on. They are being massaged into leading roles not because they deserve them, but because these companies need to pander at every given opportunity that they can. Seeing how Miles Morales is being inserted into the leading role has immediately made my hype for Insomniac's future Wolverine game go from excited to dread. Cause you can bet your sweet little ass cheeks that when Insomniac makes Wolverine, they will absolutely introduce Laura Kinney into Wolverine from the get-go. And like Peter and Miles, Insomniac will use their Wolverine game to bait and switch fans into buying their game with the promise of playing as Logan himself. But like Spider-Man 2 has proved, this is all but a Trojan horse designed to coax you into buying something that will eventually replace Logan with Laura when it comes to being Wolverine. And eventually you'll have two games that are made by Insomniac that have both lured fans with the promise of playing and enjoying stories starring their original heroes, only for them to be replaced and torn down to make way for the more diverse and socially charged versions instead. Again, I already know this video will make me lose subscribers because whenever I bring up Miles and his connection to Spider-Man, people get pissed. But you gotta be honest with yourselves, what does Miles actually deserve in your eyes? Does he deserve his own rogues gallery with their own personal connections to his character? Or does he just deserve hand-me-downs from the original Legacy version being forced upon him, like when parents give the younger sibling their older sibling's clothes? Look, Miles is a good character, but he needs to stop living in Peter's shadow. And the answer to this problem is not to remove Peter entirely from the picture, because all that does is confirm that Insomniac's intentions were always to just replace Legacy with pandering. If Insomniac really wanted to make their mark on the Spider-Man mythos, they would use their creativity to make new villains for Miles and craft new stories and possibilities that are wholly unique to him. I actually wouldn't mind a Miles Morales sequel, but if it just means it's Miles fighting a Spider-Man villain that's been contorted and replaced in every conceivable way like the Tinkerer was, then it's not the answer. Just making Miles fight the hand-me-downs of Peter is insulting to his character. This has nothing to do with Miles being black and Puerto Rican and has everything to do with these companies just inserting characters in positions that don't benefit them or the player who buys the game. In terms of sales, Marvel's Spider-Man back in 2018 sold 13.2 million copies as of 2019. Miles Morales has sold roughly 6.5 million copies, which, don't get me wrong, 6.5 million copies is great, but when you compare Miles Morales' sale numbers to the Peter Parker playable only version, Miles sold less than half of what Peter did. Spider-Man 2 sold 2.5 million copies in 24 hours of release. But again, it featured both of them, and whether people want to admit it or not, the real reason the game sold like it did was because Peter was playable as Spider-Man again. Look, I'm not saying you can't have games starring Miles Morales or the inevitable incoming introduction of Laura Kinney in Wolverine when that releases, but replacing your legacy characters with younger, gender, or race-swapped characters will not lead to better sales, because it never has anyway. You can look at any example in existence pretty much to see how this has been proven time and again already. Anything the MCU has done when they've replaced legacy characters hasn't worked. Disney Plus's Hawkeye was pretty bad, and Kate Bishop is nothing compared to Clint Barton. The Marvels is going to flop hard as hell, and even when they do make shows starring characters like Miss Marvel, nobody watches them, as Miss Marvel's Disney Plus show to this day is still the least watched show on the service. Are fans racist? I don't think so. I think it's because companies think very little of the audiences they make products for, and they genuinely believe that they'll eat up any slop that they give them as long as it looks mostly like something they would enjoy. But I think the truth is that companies are losing billions because they're treating their customers like idiots. Contrary to what CEOs and game companies think, customers can see through the bullshit. And I guarantee you, if Spider-Man 3 ends up being Miles-centric, it will not do as well as Spider-Man 2 or the original game. The damage that Spider-Man 2's story and messaging has done to the brand has been pretty damning already, since the discourse surrounding this game's many pandering elements has permeated almost a full month after its release. And I think the damage will just continue to get worse the longer it goes on. Then of course they want to introduce Silk into the Insomniac Spider-Man universe, meaning now the main trio will be Peter, Miles, and Cindy. But again, if Insomniac ends up making Cindy playable in Spider-Man 3, the game will then have 3 playable Spider people, and it will absolutely damage the story's plot and how much time is spent on each character. Let's be real, when you played Spider-Man 2, most of Miles' missions, besides maybe the Black Cat one and when he escapes Kraven and fights Mr. Negative, almost all of Miles' missions felt like afterthoughts or padding in Spider-Man 2. And pretty much anytime the game's plot actually moved forward in significant ways, it was always when Peter was the centric hero to the story. Now if we add Silk to the story, she will of course need her own story and missions, and that'll just dilute and crowd and honestly muddle the plot even more than it already was. Where the hell will Silk fit into a story where Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin are the main villains? Miles already has no personal connection to these two, so what the hell is Silk going to do when she's there? Some fans have theorized that Spider-Man 3 is hinting at a superior Spider-Man arc. For those unaware, in the comics there was a time where Dr. Octopus swapped minds with Peter, and he became Spider-Man. He was basically a brutal version of Spider-Man that used extreme violence and scientific mayhem to take down Spider-Man's villains. I have a really bad feeling that Insomniac will use this plotline in Spider-Man 3 not to challenge Peter, mind you, but in order to remove his character from the spotlight to make way for Miles and Cindy so that they can save the day instead. And again, if that ends up happening, it just further proves what I've been saying, which is that if the only way you can make Miles, or now Cindy I guess, more prominent in your story, is to remove Peter with some bullshit reason, it kinda shows you that none of this feels organic or right. If there's any game where Peter Parker needs to be the main character, it's Spider-Man 3. Because Miles and Cindy have absolutely no connection in any way to Doc Ock or Green Goblin. And I think collectively that we can all probably agree that if fans could choose who gets their own spin-off game, it's not Miles or Cindy, but of course Venom. Because at least with Venom, you have the Null mythos and characters like Carnage, Grendel, Riot, Toxin, and more to pull from. And again, this just kind of proves the whole Miles Morales is now the main Spider-Man problem. The only other character besides Peter that has any actual organic growth in terms of video game and story potential, it's Venom, not Miles. Because like I said, Null, Carnage, and more are all specifically tied to Venom as a character. Who the hell would Miles fight in a post-Spider-Man 3 world anyway? Let's say hypothetically that Doc Ock and Goblin get iced in Spider-Man 3, which is very likely considering. Now remember that Kraven is dead, Rhino, Vulture, Scorpion, and Shocker are all also dead because Kraven apparently killed most of those guys off screen. Which is super lame, but what's done is done. Now let's think of a Spider-Man 4. Who exactly is left that Peter, or I guess Miles, could even fight? I mean, you wasted Mysterio as a side character in Spider-Man 2 already, when honestly, Mysterio could have been an excellent villain for a Miles Morales 2 if anything. What you're left with is Morbius, I guess, maybe Hobgoblin, but then again that's too similar to Green Goblin already. Maybe the Jackal could work? I cringe to think of it, but it's probably what's gonna happen. But the most likely villain going forward would be Morlun, I guess, since he's this ancient evil dude who fights Spider-Man across the multiverse. And since Miles is already tied to that thanks to the Spider-Verse movies, they'll probably make Miles fight Morlun and frame him as this psychic vampire dude who wants the spider totem, and I'm already rolling my eyes. I guess they could do Alistair Smythe in a Miles Morales game, or Molten Man. Honestly, if anything, I guess Insomniac could make a sequel where Miles fights the Spot, I guess. I still want Kingpin to return because I always loved Kingpin, but based on rumors, apparently the Spider-Man 2 DLC will introduce Daredevil, so I guess Kingpin will be returning sooner than we think anyway. If Insomniac does plan to retire Peter Parker as Spider-Man, the earliest that could even be done is maybe after Spider-Man 3. Honestly, admitting that you're going to sideline the character is probably the most moronic thing you could say prior to the end of your trilogy. Now that fans know Insomniac's intentions, it's going to screw with their plans even further. I really hope they don't kill off Peter in the third game, because if Peter dies, the backlash will be subatomic nuclear levels of anger. But I think what worries me most is that these weirdo activists have burrowed themselves deep into the DNA of the video game industry. And it's gotten so bad it's going to be borderline impossible in order to remove them. There was an article back in October that got deleted by the website. It's a Latin gaming site called Hobby Consoles. Anyway, thankfully someone archived it, and it just further proves that these people are so confident that they can pander and ruin things that they eventually want to remove people like you or me from gaming altogether. That now deleted article is titled, "If Spider-Man 2's inclusive language bothers you, find another hobby, video games are not for you." As you can imagine, this article did not go over well at all, which is why it's now archived. I'll leave a link to the archive post, by the way, in the description in case you want to get your hands on it. The article basically tries to defend the use of terms like Latinx or Latinx, who cares how I pronounce it, since it's not real anyway. But Hobby Consoles tries to pander to their corporate masters, and instead of defending their language and the rules that it adheres to, they'd rather bend the knee to woke weirdos and say stuff like Latinx is totally fine because all video games are inclusive as hell anyway. The article ends by trying to frame anyone who's against this stuff like Latinx or pandering to be racists, and says it's players' faults and that they should learn to be more inclusive. They end their article by saying fans should either accept inclusivity or find a new hobby altogether. And places like Hobby Consoles are but a microcosm of a greater issue here, which is that these companies and websites have become so confident and bullish in their crusade for pandering that they believe that they don't need you, when the reality is anything but the opposite, and without us, these companies and websites would cease to exist. How the hell can you say accept ideology or leave gaming behind? You do realize the reason games exist is because of the paying customer, right? Again, this is that modern audience nonsense I've talked at lengths about, again rearing its ugly head. These idiots really think that if the current paying demographic just rejected and left video games altogether, that they would be fine since the modern audience is who they're chasing anyway. But like I've said before, what these idiots are learning the hard way is that the modern audience is about as real as their made up pronouns and identities, which is to say that the modern audience has never and will never exist. There is no modern audience, there is only what is here already, which is the audience, the paying customer, you and me, dear viewer. They think there's some multiversal version of Latinx loving customers that will somehow make up for the lost sales of actual real people, but it's not true. These weirdos have pandered so hard that they don't realize that the modern audience they're chasing is a phantom, and all they're actually chasing is something that will just lead to their own destruction and demise. It's no wonder this article was deleted and archived, because it's a classic example of another website that's attacking its audience. When a lot of these gaming sites are already hemorrhaging money, their bright idea is to pander harder instead of coming to terms with their own stupidity. And let's just call it what it is, this is pandering. Like how fans have unanimously rejected Miles' new outfit he's forced to wear at the end of the game, which looks absolute certified butt cheeks, by the way. Then it turns out this costume wasn't even a genuine thing that Insomniac added, and it was actually a selling tactic in order to promote a collaboration with Adidas. And the outfit is only in the game to pander and hopefully get fans to buy the sneakers and outfit that Miles is wearing. Which is funny, because again, almost the entire fandom seems to hate this outfit and how ridiculous it looks. But maybe that's perfect for Insomniac's Miles Morales. Cause like the character himself, they've been outed for pandering and forcing shit that nobody wants, just like that terrible outfit. And in my previous video, I spoke about Alan Wake 2 and how the company Sweet Baby Inc. was responsible when it came to the sensitivity writing and pandering that game has. And it turns out unsurprisingly that Spider-Man 2 is also a game with Sweet Baby Inc.'s DNA coursing through its veins. So ultimately, I shouldn't even be surprised that a game that panders this hard to such levels was co-written and influenced by a company that's entire point of existing is to ensure that every fiber of its being panders as hard and as often as possible. So I guess to end this very long video, all I can say, dear viewer, is that my god am I tired. I'm tired of these companies, their pandering, their push to ruin this great hobby of ours. And if Spider-Man 2's level of woke insanity tells me anything, it's that Spider-Man 3 is going to be one for the books when it comes to inclusivity and pandering. Oh boy, I can't wait for the spin-off Silk game where she fights a repurposed Spider-Man villain that isn't hers. And I also can't wait for Wolverine to be sidelined in his own game and tell Laura Kinney how amazing she is, when she obviously will surpass him and Wolverine validates her at every possible opportunity that he can. Oh dear viewer, video games, aren't you glad you're here to witness the absolute state of media in the year that is 2023? I won't stop fighting though, and I thank you for watching. I appreciate you all dearly for being here, and keep your eyes open and your minds clear. Thanks to my patrons, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Have a great day, and I truly do think we can make video games great again. Take care of yourselves, exercise, drink plenty of water, and until then, I'll see you in the next one.